Hey everyone, welcome to the PML channel, and today I'm going to be showing you how to produce a melodic house track using only Ableton Live stock devices and sounds from the PML library. My name is Matt Tinkler, I'm an Ableton certified trainer and producer, and I'm super excited to be here on the PML channel and breaking down this track for you. If you'd like to follow along with this video, there'll be a link in the description to download the project file and sounds. You will need at least Ableton Live 11.1 Suite, so go ahead, download the project file, and then let's jump into Ableton Live and get to making some music. So to start, let's take a listen to the loop that we're going to be recreating. So we're going to break down each of the different elements that are going on here in this loop and then start to flesh it out and pull it out into a full arrangement. Let's start off by going through the drums. So let's open up our kick and bass group here, zoom out a little bit in our arrangement view, and then copy our kick MIDI here over just to bar 49 by holding down the Option or Alt key and clicking and dragging, zoom in, and let's loop this section by selecting it, pressing Command or Control and L on our keyboard. And then let's take a look at the MIDI of the kick drum here by double clicking on our clip. We can see that our kick drum is just playing on every single quarter note of the bar or every single beat of every single bar for a 4 on the floor type groove. Let's take a listen to just the kick drum on its own. We can see that each of the different notes here are actually playing at the exact same velocity of 100, so there's no velocity variation going on. Let's switch back to our device view with Shift and Tab and take a look at the sound. We can see here that we've just got a kick drum sound in a simpler device, and that's why in our MIDI, we're actually playing the C3 note, which means that we're actually playing back the kick drum at the exact same pitch and length that it was recorded at. Let's switch back to our device view and take a look at the different processing we've got going on here. I'm going to turn off this audio effect rack, which is basically all the processing we're doing on this sound, and take a listen to just the kick drum by itself as it was in the recording. Pretty similar to what we ended up with, but if we have a look at this audio effect rack here and turn this on, we can see that we've actually got 3 different audio effects in here that are shaping the sound just a little bit. The first is this kick tight preset in Ableton Live's Corpus device, which is just adding a little bit of low frequency kind of elongation to the sound. If we turn off this utility and this EQ, we should be able to hear a little bit what this kick tight is doing. There's just a little bit more low frequencies coming through in the sound. Then we have a utility here, which is purely bringing down the gain just a slight little bit before running into an EQ8, which we're using to just reduce some of the really low frequencies and pull out a little bit of this kind of low mid sound here, which doesn't sound super great in the kick drum. If I boost this quite substantially, you'll actually hear the effect of this. And it's this kind of knocky, woody frequency that we're removing or reducing in our kick drum. Let's press Command or Control and Z to undo that. Before we move on to the rest of the drums, let's take a look at our sidechain trigger here, this SC track up the top. I'm going to copy and paste this again over to bar 49 by holding down Alt or Option, clicking and dragging it over here. And if we open up the MIDI clip for this SC, scroll down, we can see that we once again just have a single note playing on C3 on every quarter note of the bar, basically mimicking the exact same pattern of the kick drum. If we go ahead and switch to our device view with Shift and Tab, we can see we basically have the exact same kick playing, running through the exact same effects here. And the reason that we have this is so that we have a separate track, this SC trigger track, which we can see is actually muted. It's not playing. We don't have the device activator engaged as yellow. And this is useful because it means we can have a separate sidechain trigger to our kick drum, and so that we can have sounds that have that pumping kind of sidechained compression effect without actually having our kick drum playing at certain points. Now, for the moment, this sidechain trigger is just mimicking exactly what's going on in the kick drum. But for instance, we could have the kick drum removed for the last bar here and still have the sidechain trigger affecting any of the sounds that have sidechain compression applied, like we'll see in a moment. Let's go ahead and return that kick drum back to there and move our attention to the rest of the drums. Let's collapse this kick and bass group and open up our drums group. And now let's start by taking a look at the clap, which is made up of actually 2 different clap sounds here. I'm going to click and select both of these with Shift and click, hold down my Option or Alt key, and click and drag these to the loop that we're working with. Let's go ahead and solo just this first clap to take a listen to what that sounds like. If I double click and open up the MIDI, we can see here that again, we're playing C3 so that we can play this back at its recorded pitch, and each of the different notes are playing at 100 velocity. If we take a look at the devices on this track, we can see we again have this clap sound in simpler, nothing really going on in simpler here. We then have this utility device. Then let's turn off these two devices here, this EQ8 and this utility, and take a look at what this utility is doing first. So this utility here is actually just reducing the stereo width of the sound, just slightly. If I turn it off, take a listen to how wide this clap sounds. You might need to use headphones or something to really hear this effect, but now if we turn this utility on, take a listen to how we've just reduced the stereo width of the sound just slightly. And then you can see we have an EQ8 here, which is just removing some of these low frequencies, which aren't really necessary for this particular sound. If I turn this off, turn it back on, and if I pull this all the way down, you can really hear what that's doing to the sound. Now it's worth noting here that this clap sound is also running through this clap group, which has some sidechain compression, some reverb, and just some utility to bring down the level of it, but is also being sent to this A reverb return track here, just a little bit, which we can see here in the side of the track. Let's turn off the group processing on this track just by selecting everything, pressing the 0 key on our keyboard. And then let's take a listen to what this clap sounds like as we increase the send to reverb A just a little bit so that we can really get that reverb effect. So the original setting for this was around -24.4. So let's undo that to set it back to -24.4. And then let's take a look at the second clap down here, which is being layered with that original clap sound. You can see that the MIDI is playing the exact same as the MIDI for that first clap. Let's go back to our device view. And then we have a utility, which is actually doing nothing, that can be deleted. And then we have an EQ8 here, which is again removing low frequencies from this clap 2 sound. Let's take a listen to what this clap 2 sound sounds like without the EQ8. And then with the EQ8 on, you can see we're just removing some kind of unnecessary low frequencies here with this high pass filter. You can also see here that in our simpler device, we've actually gone ahead and taken a clap sound and then changed the start position of it so that it starts just on this last kind of flam of the clap, rather than having these 3 little stutters beforehand. If we take the start position back to the start, this is what the original clap sound sounded like. And now if we change our start position here, just allows us to get a little bit of a tighter sound, which is useful for when we're layering it with this other clap. It's worth noting that this clap is also being sent to this reverb here, which we just have some simple reverb settings followed by an EQ8 to reduce or remove some low frequencies in the reverb. And then both of these claps are being grouped together and running through this clap group here. Let's solo this entire clap group so we can hear these two sounds layered together, and then run through our processing. Let's turn on this first one, which is our sidechain compressor, which is receiving its signal from this sidechain track here, and then reducing the level of the claps every single time it receives one of those sidechain trigger signals. And what this is doing is basically reducing the level of the transient or that initial start of the clap sound every single time this sidechain trigger happens, which is also every single time the kick happens, to just kind of duck it out of the way slightly. Turn it off, turn it back on, and let's hear it in context with the kick as well. Next, we have some reverb. Which is just adding some nice space to this clap. And then again, we have a utility, which isn't actually doing anything here. We can delete that. And then we have another utility, which is just reducing the gain of this slightly rather than using the gain on the clap track here. Let's now turn our attention to the rest of the drums, going through this perk loop, hat loop, shaker loop, and ride loop here. Let's start with this perk loop. Let's copy this over to our loop with Alt or Option, clicking and dragging, solo our perk loop, and then turn off these two effects to take a listen to what it sounds like by itself. Firstly, it's worth noting that we actually have a groove applied to this loop. Let's go ahead and double click on the loop so that we can have a look at it. And if we come down to this clip section here and take a look at where it says groove, we can see that we have the swing MPC 3016 57 groove applied to this clip. And if we take a look at our groove pool, which we can see here, or just by opening up the groove section if we can't see it. Note that if you're on Ableton Live 12, the groove section is actually accessed up the top left. Here in Ableton Live 11, we have it accessed down the bottom of the browser. And what this groove is doing is actually adjusting the timing of the sounds in our audio clip to give it a little bit more swing. If I come up to the groove in our groove pool and adjust this timing to 100%, you'll really be able to hear what's going on with this groove. Let's pull it down to 0% and take a listen to what the loop sounded like before this groove was applied. Very subtly applying some swing and some adjustment to the sounds in this audio clip so that we can just make it fit a little bit better and groove a little bit more with the track. Let's take a look now at our device view. We can see here that we've got an EQ8, which is being used to remove the low frequencies of the sound and the high frequencies, just so we can focus in on these mid frequencies right here. And then you can see we have this sidechain compressor, which is again doing the exact same thing as the sidechain compressor on the claps to just reduce the level of this perk or percussion loop every single time the kick plays, or rather the sidechain trigger plays, which again is mimicking the pattern of the kick drum. And you can hear how that percussion loop is adding some nice groove to the sound. It's also worth noting that this percussion loop is also being sent to that reverb return so that it's being sent to the same kind of space that the clap is being sent to as well. Let's go ahead and now take a look at the hat loop by copying this over by holding down Alt or Option and clicking and dragging. Solo this hi-hat loop and take a listen to it. And with this hi-hat loop, we're basically doing the exact same thing that we were doing with the percussion loop. If we open it up, we can see that we've got the groove applied here to this hi-hat loop clip as well, and that we also have some low and high passing going on here with an EQ8 and some sidechain so that we have the volume of the hi-hat loop being reduced every single time the kick or the sidechain trigger plays. If I turn these two things off and back on. And this hi-hat loop is also being sent to this reverb as well. Next, let's take a look at the shaker loop. Again, by clicking and dragging, pulling this over here, solo this shaker loop to take a listen to what it sounds like. And once again, we're applying that same groove here to the shaker loop, applying some sidechain compression and some very subtle EQing just in a high pass and a low pass to remove the low and high frequencies of the sounds, or rather just kind of reduce them subtly. Once again, this is being sent to our A return track reverb here by -13 dB, and let's take a listen to this in context. And lastly, let's take a look at this ride loop here, copy this over to our new loop, and you can see if we take a look at the ride, we're again applying this same groove here. We're applying some high passing with the EQ8 and some sidechain compression with our compressor here. Let's solo the ride loop, turn off the EQ8 and the sidechain, and back on. So just giving a little bit more pumping and reducing the level of some of those low frequencies in this sound. And so now we have basically all of our drums together. Let's take a listen to now what we have with our drums. And let's go ahead And just so that we can hear what each of these different loops are doing, let's select all of these loops, turn them all off, and then turn them on just one by one so we can really hear how they're adding to the groove as a whole. By the way, if you want to get your hands on some more quality drum sounds like the ones we're using here, make sure to check out the PML Deep Premium Drum Sample series, which is loaded with high quality drum one-shots and loops, just like the ones we're using in this breakdown. Now that we've got our drums, let's turn our attention to the synths of this loop. So let's open up the kick and bass group here and take a look at the bass sound. First up, let's go ahead and just copy this bass MIDI over to our loop and solo it so we can hear exactly what the bass sounds like. And so to show you through the process of creating a sound like this, what I'm gonna do is actually create a new MIDI track by selecting this bass track here, Command or Control Shift and T to create a new MIDI track. And then I'm just gonna copy the MIDI here from this bass track down onto this MIDI track. So now we're just loaded with the blank MIDI for the bass. If I open this up, and open up the clip view, we can see exactly what the MIDI here is doing. Now you'll notice that this MIDI is actually playing on every single 16th note of our clip, just with a little bit of a gap between each of the notes, and is also using the exact same groove as our percussion loops here, this swing MPC 3016th 57 groove. And what this is allowing it to do is make it so everything is locked into the same groove, which gives it a much more tight feel. If this didn't have the groove, it wouldn't sound anywhere nearly as good because it wouldn't be locked in with all of the percussion going on as well. Let's close up the clip view here and grab the synth from our bass track, which is using analog here, Command or Control and C to copy this over to our new MIDI track with Command or Control and V, and take a look at exactly what the synth sound is doing here. So let's solo our new track, take a listen, and run through the settings of the synth. So Analog is Ableton Live's stock analog style synthesizer, and you can see here that we have two oscillators which are kind of making the sound. This first oscillator here is set to a square wave and is playing 2 octaves below the incoming note. If we turn off this second oscillator, turn off the filter as well, take a listen to what this sounds like just as is. Not really fantastic. And this is being run through this amplifier here, which has an ADSR or attack, decay, sustain, release envelope with just a reduced sustain and a little bit of decay to give it a more kind of plucky volume characteristic. Let's undo that. And we're also layering this first oscillator here with a second oscillator, which is playing 3 octaves below the incoming MIDI note, so 1 octave below oscillator 1, and is instead using a sine wave instead of a square wave, and we've also reduced the level of it just slightly. So what it's doing is kind of acting like a base or a sub layer to this main oscillator here. Then we're running these 2 oscillators through filter 1 here, which is a low pass filter with a steep 24 dB per octave slope, with a very low cutoff frequency, which is being affected by this filter envelope here. Let's take a listen to this with the filter again. And take a listen to what happens as I increase this filter frequency. We're introducing more high frequencies into the sound. And then we're actually using this envelope here in the center to move this filter frequency over time. And we're doing this with this little envelope control right here, which is currently set to 4. If I double click this and set this to 0, we're not going to get any filter frequency movement, and we're going to get a very muffled sound. And then as I increase this envelope control, take a listen to what happens to the sound. Because of our envelope settings with this low sustain, basically 0 attack, and a kind of somewhat moderate decay, we're getting this kind of plucky sound. It's worth noting that we also have some drive applied to this filter here with Sim 1, which is just adding some subtle saturation to the sound. Next, if we take a look at our original sound, we can see we have some EQ going on here. Let's get this EQ going from scratch. So I'm going to go over to my audio effects, find EQ 8 under EQ and filters, click and drag this to after the analog, and then all the EQ in the original sound is doing is just reducing the level of some low frequencies, which kind of don't necessarily need to be there, reducing the level of some high frequencies here with a low pass filter, and then using one of these two bell EQs just to reduce the level of these kind of low mid frequencies with a little bit of a narrower Q value. And then just to accentuate the lower frequencies a little bit, let's grab this other one and just boost up these low frequencies slightly, again with a little bit of a narrow Q value, which we can adjust the Q value by holding down the Alt or Option key and clicking and dragging up or down whilst holding on the particular node. Without the EQ, and with the EQ. Just boosting the level of those particularly low frequencies a little bit more and reducing the level of those kind of unnecessary higher frequencies because we're going for that deep melodic house style. Up next in our original sound, we can see we have the A Bit Warmer Saturator preset. So let's go ahead and grab that from our library here. I'm actually going to go ahead and search for A Bit Warmer, which is under Drive and Color, Saturator, A Bit Warmer, and click and drag this after our EQ here. And if we take a look and compare this to the original sound, we can see that on the original sound, we just have a little bit more drive, and that's basically about it. So let's increase the drive here slightly, and then reduce the output of this saturator to compensate for the amount of drive that we're adding. It's just adding some nice warmth to the signal. Next, in our original sound, we can see we have this bass mono utility preset. And in this particular instance, this isn't actually doing basically anything because our sound is already in mono. So we can actually skip this effect for the moment and move our attention to this sidechain compressor. And so here with this sidechain compressor, this is again just reducing the level of the bass every single time the kick drum plays a note. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, copy this with Command or Control and C, move over to our new bass track and paste this after the A Bit Warmer here. And just so that you're aware of how to set this up yourself, if you go to your audio effects and grab a compressor, all you need to do is open up the sidechain options, engage the sidechain input, select where you want the audio to come from, in this case from our SC track, leave it set to post effects. You could play around with some EQ settings here. For the moment, we can turn this off, and then adjust your threshold to pull it down so that it's being triggered by the incoming signal. Let's turn off this old compressor here so that we can play around with this new one. We can adjust the ratio to control how much of this ducking is happening. The attack here will control how fast this ducking happens. And the release here will control the speed of the pumping going back to the original volume. You might also want to make sure that the compressor is set to peak mode rather than RMS mode, which will affect the sound quite drastically. So let's set this to peak mode and take a listen to how it's affecting this compressor. So play around with setting this to peak or RMS. Let's go ahead and delete this compressor here and turn on our original compressor. And now take a listen to our new bass sound in context with the rest of the loop. Let's rename our track here by right-clicking, clicking on rename to bass new, and mute the original bass sound here. Next, let's turn our attention to the other synths in our track. Let's close up this kick and bass group and open up our synths group here. As here you can see we've got 4 different synths. We have this pad, melody, melody support, and white noise. The white noise is more of an effect, and we'll get to that later, but let's start with the pad sound. Let's once again copy this pad MIDI over to our new loop, solo it to take a listen to what it sounds like. And look at how we go ahead and create this ourselves. So I'm going to go ahead and again create a new MIDI track with Command, Shift, and T, and pull down our MIDI from this pad onto our new MIDI track. Open this up and solo this MIDI track. And let's take a look at the MIDI here. Zoom out a little bit by moving our cursor to the left and clicking and dragging to the left. And you can see that we've just got some chords that are basically mimicking the melodic or harmonic pattern or movement of our bass sound, just with a few extra notes here and there. And if you want to learn how to write chords like this and melodies that go along with them for this style of music, make sure to check out the Music Theory for Melodic House and Techno course on the PML website. There'll be a link in the description for that. Let's go ahead, close up this clip view, go back to our original pad and copy this analog synth here with Command or Control and C onto our new MIDI track, Command or Control and V, and take a listen to what the synth sounds like by itself. So the synth settings for this are pretty simple. We have the first oscillator here set to a sawtooth wave, playing 1 octave below the incoming note. No other sounds going on here in the oscillator section. And we have this running through, again, a low pass filter with a bit of an envelope going on this filter as well. And this envelope, instead of being really pulled down in the sustain and basically no attack, instead here we have some attack and a little bit of a higher sustain just to get a little bit more movement in this filter without it really cutting off the sound and giving that plucky characteristic. So you can hear that adjusting the attack there can really shape what this sound sounds like when it receives a note. Let's set this back to the original settings with Command or Control and Z, and then turn our attention to the amplifier, which has a kind of reduced sustain, and again some decay with basically no attack, and this is just accentuating the beginning of the sound slightly. If I pull up the sustain, so it's really nice just having this down a little bit with some decay to accentuate the beginning of the sound. And then lastly, if we go over to our global section, we can see we have some vibrato here, which is just giving some movement or warbly kind of characteristics to these notes. And then we have the glide option here turned on as well, with the setting set to constant mode. And what this is doing is basically making it so that every new note will have a slide in pitch from the previous note. And on the chords, that's what's giving this kind of wham kind of feeling at the beginning. And the length of this glide is controlled by the time control here. Let's set this back to 45% and take a look at the effects. So if we take a look at the original sound, we can see that we've added some reverb here, just to give the sound a little bit more space. So you could do this yourself by coming and finding the reverb in your audio effects, simply by searching reverb, reverb and resonance, clicking and dragging reverb after the analog here. And then the settings on the original reverb are really simple. We've just set the quality to high and increased our decay time to about 2.5 seconds or so. And then just reduce the dry wet and take a listen to what this sound sounds like with our new reverb. Just a really nice amount of space added to this sound, along with some stereo width. Next, our original sound has an EQ8 here, just to reduce or remove some of the low frequencies. So let's again add an EQ8, EQ and filters, EQ8, turn on our high pass, and just pull this up a little bit. And that's going to stop it from clashing with our lower frequency sounds like our bass. In the original sound, this was actually set to a steeper filter. So let's go ahead and change this to the 4x filter here, and maybe just reduce the frequency of this slightly. And then we have some sidechain compression again, which will just copy from our original pad sound to save us from having to copy the settings. Command or Control and C. Paste this after our EQ with Command or Control and V, and make sure the audio here is set to our sidechain rather than our kick. Lastly, we have some more EQ here with this EQ8, just reducing some of these mid frequencies. We could actually do this in the original EQ here, just by pulling down this EQ node around 1K. And then we can see in the original sound, we're actually using this utility control here to just increase the stereo width of the sound slightly. So let's go ahead and add utility to this sound, and then use this width control just to increase the stereo width of the sound very slightly. Let's pull down the level of this sound to match the original sound to -7.2, And then you can see we're also sending this first pad here to that same reverb return track just by a little bit, -24.4 or so, just to add a little bit of extra space to this sound. Let's go ahead and reduce the level of the bass sound we added earlier as well to match the bass sound from the original loop. And then take a listen to our new pad sound in context. Let's mute the original pad sound, call this analog track here pad new, and turn our attention to the melody. So let's go ahead and move this melody MIDI over to our new loop with Option clicking and dragging, solo the melody, and take a listen to what it sounds like. Once again, let's go ahead and create a new MIDI track, Command, Shift, and T, and then pull this melody here onto our new MIDI track, open up the MIDI, and you can see here that this is the MIDI that we're playing. It's a very simple and classic kind of rhythmic pattern, just with some nice movement in the melody notes. Very, very simple movement, mostly this kind of stepwise ascending movement, which is really nice as this kind of melodic loop in this track. Now you'll notice that the groove here is not actually applied to this MIDI, although it could be, and we could go ahead and select the groove here from this groove drop-down menu so that we have this melody also with the same groove applied as all of the percussion and the bass sound in this track as well. But just to keep things sounding how they were, let's turn off the groove here and turn our attention to the sound. Let's go ahead and copy the analog synth from the original melody track to our new MIDI track. Once again, we have oscillator 1 here playing a sawtooth wave, which is 1 octave below the incoming note. And then we also have this noise oscillator here adding some noise into the sound. If I turn this off, take a listen, and then turn it on, it just adds a nice little bit of extra texture to the sound. This is once again running through filter 1 with this more plucky envelope going on here. And then this is of course being controlled by the envelope on amp 2, which once again has this kind of lower sustain value and a little bit of decay to again give it that really plucky characteristic. Then in the original sound, we actually have a delay going on here, which is really what's giving this sound a sense of more interesting rhythm and space. So let's go ahead and add a delay to our new sound, coming to delay and loop, selecting delay, pulling it after the analog here. And then our original sound actually has the delay of the left and the right sides unlinked, our left side set to 4 and our right side set to 6. And then we have this ping pong setting turned on so that we have this kind of delay bouncing between the left and the right speakers. At the moment, this is quite long and uncontrolled. So let's go ahead and turn the feedback down to about 35%. Do the same with the dry wet. And then let's go ahead and with the filter here, focus it just on these higher frequencies like we've done in the original sound, so that this delay is just more of a layer rather than taking over the sound in its entirety. Next, in the original sound, we actually have this auto pan, which is moving the sound just subtly between the left and the right speakers. Let's go ahead and add this ourselves to our new melody sound by searching for auto pan, which is under pitch and modulation, leaving the settings here at 1 Hertz rate, phase 180, and just increasing the amount subtly up to about 25% or so, which is basically what it is in the original sound. Next, in the original sound, you can see we have this large shimmer plate, which is a preset using Ableton Live's hybrid reverb. We can find this again just by searching for large shimmer, opening up reverb and resonance, hybrid reverb, space, and finding this large shimmer plate. And let's just click and drag this onto our new melody track after the auto pan, and then pull down the dry wet just to match our original sound, which is at about 25 or so %. Next, in the original sound, we have some EQ to just again remove some of those low frequencies. Let's just copy this over this time with Command or Control and C, paste it after our reverb with Command or Control and V. And this is particularly useful because we have that noise in the original synthesizer. Then the original sound has this envelope follower, which we're going to ignore for the second. We don't need to worry about that. Except then we have this compressor here, which is just being used to add some subtle compression to the sound rather than actual sidechain compression like we've been used to. And so to copy this, let's go ahead and just grab a compressor here from our dynamics after our EQ, pull down our threshold and set this to peak mode. And we don't really need to change any of the other settings here for the moment because they kind of sound all right on this sound. If we wanted to, we could experiment with different attack settings to bring out the transients more, or different release settings to just play around with how compressed or squashed this sound really is. Let's go ahead though and just set these back to the default by double clicking on them. And then lastly, of course, let's go ahead and add our sidechain compression to this new sound, selecting the sidechain compressor from the original melody and pasting it on our new track and setting the audio in from our sidechain. Let's rename this new melody track to new melody, turn it down to match the original one to -1.7, and take a listen to it in context with the rest of our loop so far. One thing I did forget to do there is in our compressor, just increase the output gain just subtly to compensate for how much we're reducing the level of the sound with this compressor. But now we've done that, let's go ahead, turn off our original melody and turn our attention to this melody support sound. Once again, let's copy the MIDI from this melody support sound over to our new loop, solo it to take a listen to what it sounds like. And let's go ahead and recreate this sound. I'm going to go ahead and once again create a new MIDI track with Command, Shift, and T, move our MIDI onto our new track, open this up, and let's take a quick look at the MIDI itself, zoom out, and you can see we have this kind of arpeggiated continuous pattern, which plays basically the exact same for the first 4 bars, and then has a slight variation for the next 4 bars. In this way, it's kind of mimicking the movement of the melody as well, which is why we're calling it the melody support sound. Now, again, it's worth noting that this sound is not using the groove from the rest of our track. You could turn the groove on, but in this instance, we have it set to none. Let's go ahead and take a look at our synth settings by copying the synth from the original sound and pasting it onto our new track. So this is what the synth itself sounds like. And we can see here the settings for this are very similar to the settings for the actual melody. We have a sawtooth wave in oscillator 1 playing 1 octave below the incoming note. We have some noise here blended in subtly at -19 dB, and using this color control here to just reduce the level of the higher frequencies of this noise. Let's reset them to the original settings with Command and Z. And then we have this running through filter 1, which again has that kind of plucky characteristic going on here with the envelope. The sustain is pulled all the way down in this particular case, and we have a shorter decay as well. And then in our amp, we again have the basically exactly the same settings of the sustain set to 0.5 and our decay 626, which is basically the default settings of Ableton Live's analog. We have the level of the amplifier pulled up slightly, and that is pretty much the synth sound. Then let's take a look at the effects. On our original sound, we have a delay, which is basically mimicking the exact same delay as we have in our original melody. We can see left 4, right 6, feedback around 35, dry wet 33, ping pong mode with the same filtering. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste this after our synth. Take a listen to this. And then we actually have some more delay applied using Ableton Live's Echo device right here. So Ableton Live's Echo is another of Ableton Live's delay devices. We can find this again in our audio effects. So I'm going to go ahead, come to delay and loop and open up Echo after delay here. And then all that we've done with the settings of this Echo is really just reduce the dry wet here to around 30%, just so we're adding a little bit more extra space to this sound. And it really just gives it this more textural effect rather than this melodic sound, which is really cool as this background element in the track. Next, in the original sound, we again have this large shimmer plate preset for Ableton Live's hybrid reverb that we've just reduced the dry wet of to about 20%. So let's go ahead and copy this to our new melody track after the echo. And then lastly, in the original sound, we have some EQ here just to remove those low frequencies so that it's more focused on those kind of higher textural sounds. Let's go ahead and copy this EQ8 again to our new sound here. So you can really hear how much this EQ is doing in this particular instance. And then of course we have this followed by our sidechain compressor, which we can just copy from our original sound, paste after this EQ here, set the audio from the sidechain from our sidechain, and then rename this to Melody Support New, turn down the track so that it matches the level of the original at -7.7, unsolo this track, mute the original track, and take a listen to our new melody support sound in context. Now that we've got all the synths, let's turn our attention to the effects sounds in this track. So the first kind of effect sound that we have is this white noise sound here. Let's go ahead and copy the MIDI from this white noise over to our new loop, solo it so we can take a listen to how it sounds. And instead of recreating this one, let's just take a look at the settings and how it's doing what it's doing. So let's go ahead and turn off all of these effects and take a look, first of all, at the analog synthesizer here, which is actually just using the noise oscillator in analog with the color all the way open, running through filter 1, which is actually not doing anything and is completely open here. And then of course, this is going through our first amplifier here, which has basically the exact same envelope settings as all the other envelopes with the sustain set to 50% or 0.5. And then we have this running through an EQ8, which is removing those lower frequencies. And then to give this sound some stereo width, we're actually running this through this audio effect rack, which we've called Haas effect. And what this is doing is basically splitting the sound into the left side and the right side, and then delaying one side slightly to give it a little bit of an offset, which adds some stereo width. If we turn this on, take a listen to what it now sounds like. Turn it off. Back on. We have this really, really wide sound. If we want to create this from scratch, we could go ahead and get a delay, set the delay here to time, pull the feedback all the way down, the dry wet all the way up, turn off the filter, and reduce the time here to, again, about 10 or so milliseconds. Then we can go ahead and group this to an audio effect rack by right-clicking, clicking on Group, opening up the chain list, right-clicking to create a new chain, and then panning our original chain all the way to one side. Let's pan it to the right, and then our dry chain all the way to one side. Let's pan it to the left. And so now this first chain is delaying the signal and passing it all the way through to the right speaker, whilst this second chain here isn't delaying the signal and just passing it through, but passing it through to the left speaker. So let's turn off that old Haas effect, and now we can hear that this is doing basically exactly the same thing. So let's collapse this Haas effect here and move on to our next audio effect, which is this EQ8 here. Again, just reducing or removing even more low frequencies. Then we have a utility, which is using the width control here to just reduce the stereo width that we've added with that Haas effect, just subtly, so we're controlling the stereo width rather than completely removing it. And then a lot of this sound is coming from this auto pan right here, which we can see actually has its rate automated. If I open up the automation by pressing the A key on my keyboard, we can see that the frequency or the rate of this auto pan is actually being automated to start really fast and then reduce over time over the course of this sound. If I turn on the auto pan, you'll hear exactly what this is doing, in that we have this sound really rapidly moving from left to right as it slows down that movement gradually over the course of the sound. Lastly, of course, we have some sidechain compression. Let's again make sure the audio is being received from the sidechain here. And now take a listen to this white noise sound in context with the rest of the loop. Next, let's turn our attention to the effects in this effects group down the bottom here, which are all fairly simple. We have this shaker loop to begin with. Let's copy this over to our new loop and take a look at the audio clip. It's really, really quiet and really subtle. Let's increase the level of it so we can hear it a bit better. And this actually, again, has this groove applied here to it. But what it also has is this warping mode applied to it here, set to beats, preserving 16ths, and set to this forward arrow with the envelope quite short, which is giving it that really, really kind of rhythmic effect. If I increase this value to 100, we get the original loop. And as I reduce this, you'll hear it becomes more stuttery. And so this loop just adds a little bit more interesting texture to the track. Let's undo all that to reset it to the original volume. Next, let's take a look at the effects. And you can see that really all we have here is just this EQ8, which is just reducing the level of those low frequencies. And then we have this, of course, being sent to that return track with the reverb on it as well. Let's set this back to its original volume of -27.5 and turn our attention to this next effects, which is this ambience. And we're basically doing the exact same thing with this ambience loop here. Let's copy this over to our new loop, take a look, and we can see that it's basically just this kind of textural ambience loop. If we solo this and increase the level of the track, it's just this really textural sound. Let's set the volume back to what it was. And then we can see this is just running through, again, an EQ8, which is removing some of those low frequencies. Then we have this sweeps here. Let's copy this over to the start of our loop and take a listen. And all this is basically just a sample. If we open it up and zoom out, we can see there's kind of this noise riser effect into this sweep as well as this kind of downfall. And then we're running this through some reverb, some EQ, and then this compressor, which actually isn't doing anything at the moment, but could be sidechained from our sidechain trigger. And lastly, in this effects group, we have this little sweep up here, which is really, really subtle. If we move this to the end of the loop, and this is just kind of aiding the transition back to the beginning of the original loop. Just a really, really subtle and quiet white noise sweep, which again, we're high passing to remove a lot of those low frequencies. And so all of these effect sounds together just add some nice subtle background texture to our loop. It's also worth noting that on the effects group here, we have an EQ8, which is removing everything below 124 Hertz, and then a low pass filter in auto filter, which we could use to say automate at certain points in the track to reduce or remove the high frequencies. Lastly, let's turn our attention to these vocal sounds here. Let's go ahead and first take a look at this vocal 1 sound. Let's copy this over to the start of our loop and the last one over to the end of our loop, solo them, and take a listen to what they sound like. And all this is just a sample from one of our packs. We can see here, it's just this kind of vocal swell sample. It's been pitched down by 2 semitones here just to match the key of the track, and then run through some reverb, some sidechain compression, and some EQ. And then lastly, we have this vocal R sound here, which is actually created in MIDI. And if we copy this MIDI clip over to the last bar of our loop, we can see that on this track, we actually have a vocal sample loaded up inside of Ableton Live's sampler. And that's running through a bunch of effects, which gets this sound. So what's going on here is we have this vocal sample, which has been loaded up into Ableton Live sampler. Normally, this would have the entire thing triggered like this. But instead, we've focused in on just a single section of this sample, which is looping a specific note. Back and forth using the back and forth sustain mode, which we can see down here. We've set the root key to the root key of the note that we're using here, and then run this through some effects. Let's turn off all these effects. First off, we have a compressor, which is just compressing the signal. Then we have an EQ8, which is removing some low frequencies. And then we have this auto pan, which is where that stuttery effect is coming from. If I open up the automation and click on this amount control here, we can see that we're actually automating the amount of this auto pan to increase over time. And this auto pan actually isn't panning from side to side. Instead, we have it set to 16th notes, the shape set to a sawtooth wave with a little bit of shape here. And then with the phase set down to 0 degrees, we're applying the same movement to both the left and the right speakers, which basically just creates this stuttery effect. And then as the amount here is automated to increase, we're increasing the level of this stuttering effect. Let's add this as an automation lane by clicking on this little plus icon. Then we can see we have an EQ8 removing some more low frequencies, and then another auto pan, which is now being used with the amount automated in again. Let's add this as another automation lane. And this auto pan is actually moving the sound from side to side like an auto pan typically does, and the amount of this is again being increased over time. So we have some subtle left and right movement over the course of this sound. Then we have a utility here with its gain being automated to increase. Let's add this as an automation lane as well, so that the sound fades in over time and acts as more of a riser sound. Lastly, we have some sidechain compression and then some reverb just to give the sound a little bit more space. And so now that we have this main loop, let's take a look at taking it and turning it into a basic and simple arrangement. Before we do though, if you're new to producing and want to learn Ableton Live inside and out, make sure to check out the PML Beginner to Advanced Ableton Live course over on the website. First of all, let's start here at bar 81 and create a locator for the intro. This intro we want to last for 8 bars. So here until bar 89, right click and add another locator, and this is going to be our build. Then our build is going to last for 8 bars, and then from bar 97, we're going to have our drop 1. Let's have our drop 1 last for 16 bars, so until bar 113. And this could be the breakdown. Then we could have a little bit of a 4-bar gap here before the breakdown continues. So let's go breakdown 2. And then this breakdown 2 here could last for 16 bars. So until bar 133, where we can introduce another build up, which lasts for 8 bars into the second drop, which we're going to call drop 2. And then drop 2 can last for 16 bars. And then we can have the outro. Then the outro can last again for 16 bars. And this is where the track will end. So then to flesh out this arrangement, let's copy all of our loop here into drop 1, duplicate this with Command and D so that we can flesh out drop 1, and then do the same and have this in drop 2 as well. So paste this with Command and V and then duplicate it. And then let's have our sidechain trigger last here for the whole track all the way until the end. Likewise with our kick, let's copy this and then just duplicate this throughout the whole track all the way until the end. And then the same with our bass. Let's copy this here from the intro to the build up and then have it playing here in breakdown number 2 for the build. And then in the outro, let's paste it here as well. And then with the drums, let's have it so this clap here starts in the build up. Maybe this percussion loop begins from the intro. We build up into the hi-hat loop, and then the full rest of the loops happen here in the main drop. We could have these claps continue here at breakdown 2, or the second part of the breakdown, and then maybe extend this percussion loop from here, bring the claps back in here in the build up, bring the hi-hat loop here, and then maybe let's have this hi-hat loop here at breakdown 2 as well, and then extend this percussion loop out to the end. Next, let's have our synths playing most of the time as well. Let's have the pad play in the intro, the build up, and again in the breakdown here. Let's copy this over to here and duplicate this a few times and into the outro as well. And let's have this melody lasting the whole time as well. Paste this here in the intro and into the breakdowns, duplicate this across and duplicate this for the outro here. And then this melody support and white noise can be reserved for the drops. Then in the effects section, let's have it so this shaker lasts for the entirety of the track, as well as this ambience loop. And then let's play around with the position of some of these sweeps. I'm going to extend this back out. We could actually split this clip here with Command and E and have it so the sweep moves into the drop. We could keep this sweep here, keep this sweep here, but maybe move this sweep into here so that it sweeps into the second breakdown. And then we could maybe use some of these vocals. Let's delete this vocal R here so it just happens at the end. And let's have this sweep happen into that. Copy these and paste this moving into the build-up as well. And then potentially delete this vocal sweep here. And then we could just copy and paste exactly this from this second half of the breakdown to there, and do the same thing with these sweeps as well. And so now we have a really basic arrangement that goes through intro, build up, drop, a little bit of a gap here, a breakdown, build up, drop to, and outro. Let's just skip through it to have a listen. And then from here, we could go and add some automation on different elements to really kind of shape how this track moves along through its different sections. Let's close up the drums here, close up the kick and bass. And with the pad, let's go ahead and add, say, an auto filter and automate the filter frequency of this auto filter to increase over the course of the intro and build up, and then just move throughout the track. So I could right click on the filter frequency here, show the automation in a new lane, have this start quite low, increase over the course of this intro and build up, and maybe it doesn't increase as much over the course of the intro. And then potentially we can even have it so that it increases over the course of the drop as well, before kind of going back down here right at the end as a little bit of a transition. And then we could copy this kind of automation throughout this breakdown, building up into the build up, maybe building up a little bit into the drop, building up even more throughout this drop, falling down again here, and then being really low in the outro. And we could do a similar thing with, say, the melody as well. With the melody here, I could actually automate the filter frequency on the filter of the synthesizer, right click, show the automation here in a new lane, and have it so that it starts quite low for the first bit, and then does a very similar thing and increases towards the build up, and then throughout the drop, maybe increases a little bit as well, and then potentially builds up, falls back down again, and builds up once again. And then we could repeat this very similar movement throughout the rest of the track, starting halfway through this breakdown, paste that there, and let's have this really low here in the breakdown. And then once again, have it quite low in the outro as well. then we could even adjust it so that maybe some of the drums cut out, say in this last bar just before the drop here. Just delete the kick drum, go and do that for the second build up into the second drop as well. And then to add a little bit of variation and interest in these drops, let's add another auto filter, set this to a high pass, reduce the filter frequency, increase the resonance slightly, and then just automate this to turn on in the last bar of, say, every 8 bars or so. Let's switch to our pencil tool with the B key and just automate this on the last bar of every 8 bars in the drop. Just add some nice subtle variation to the loop so that it doesn't get too repetitive. And from here, you could go and maybe adjust, say, the progression in the breakdown and the outro, maybe add in, say, some octaves in the melodies or some variation, add some more automation in, say, this melody support sound, and even play around with the position of some of these different sweeps. But that is just a really simple way that we could go ahead and begin to create an arrangement out of that loop that we had in this video. So there you have it. There's a breakdown of a melodic house style track in Ableton Live. If you want to learn to create more tracks like this, make sure to check out the Melodic House Academy over on the PML website. It's got tons of resources like courses, sounds, and samples to get you creating high quality, professional sounding tracks. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.